Amen. Welcome everyone back. Thank you, Sister Catherine, for sharing this morning. I'm aware as we're doing these studies that we do have a mixture of an audience between those who are less familiar with what this movement teaches. Some may be quite unfamiliar, quite new to what we teach that participate now, and some who have been following this movement for quite some years. So there is a mixture, and there is an attempt throughout these studies to try and reach both. But for the progression of the message, we do find that we have to move on beyond what many people might be familiar with. So I'm hoping that if they have those questions from these studies, that they will speak to people, speak to the leaders in their area, and also go back to prior presentations. If you see what happened last year, the same message was taught and retaught through a series of schools and camp meetings. So you had something like Acts 27 that was taught and retaught and retaught. Because of the amount of teaching slots that were available, and the message really grew through being repeated and repeated. As we've had to handle this pandemic, we haven't been able to do that. So some of the things that were presented in Australia over the last 2-3 months would normally go to another school, another camp meeting, and they would be repeated again with more information, repeated again with more information, maybe condensed, maybe summarized, maybe stretched out over a school and developed further. But none of that has been able to happen because of the pandemic. So a subject like the Apis bull is not being repeated in any school or camp meeting as it was done here. So it becomes important that if things are strange to us or new to us that are taught in this time, that we go back and study through that, through those series of classes to make sure we understand what was being there taught. It's a danger that's happening at the moment that if we miss something, we're not necessarily going to find it at the next camp meeting, because right now there are none. So if you have those questions about something like the Apis bull or Church and State in America, the 7 mountains, those earlier studies take us through it, but they're not getting repeated the way that we would normally expect them to be repeated. I want to begin with a quote. It's from Third Selected Messages, 3SM 162.3. 162.3. In reviewing our past history, having travelled over every step of advance to our present standing, I can say, praise God. As I see what God has wrought, I am filled with astonishment and with confidence in Christ as our leader. We have nothing to fear for the future, except as we shall forget the way the Lord has led us and His teaching in our past history. This was written when? If you go to the quote, 1893. And why is 1893 significant? It's the 126 to 2019. We have nothing to fear for the future, except as we forget the way the Lord has led us. I started addressing this point last week, and I'm still continuing to hear people's fears and doubts that relate to how God has led us. So I want to repeat and enlarge on what was taught last week on this subject. It becomes concerning to me when I see that many of the problems or questions we have in the movement right now, many of the issues that people have, are subjects that have been already addressed, already explained in previous studies. They're already stumbling blocks that should have been removed out of our pathway if we're familiar with the history of the last 18 months. And yet, a stumbling block a year ago is being remade, and it's a stumbling block now. And it's something that has already been explained by how God has led us. So I want to give a further explanation on the message of the King of the North and the King of the South, and then take that to the subject of the Sunday law, and 2014 particularly. So we discussed last week, how God teaches us. It's essentially the way you would teach a little child. How you would teach a little child the structure of an atom, and how that becomes more detailed depending on how you view it, both more complex, but in some ways more simple as time goes on. And we particularly looked at how God has done that with the message of Daniel 11:40 Part B, the King of the North and the King of the South. We'll try and go straighter. So, 1989. Is the time of the end. (1989) marks the increase of knowledge, and then what we're going to begin to understand is the opening up of, again, the book of Daniel, Daniel 11:40 Part B. Daniel 11:40 Part B, and what do we begin to understand? What we understand is 1989. That's what you find in the Time of the End magazine, that 1989 is a battle between the King of the North and the King of the South. Now, I'm going to roughly say that we understand that in 1996. So there's an increase of knowledge in the history of the ploughing, where we start to understand Daniel 11:40 Part B. We understand that it is explaining a prior battle in history. It's opening up 1989 as a fulfillment of Part B. And then what happens to that message of the King of the North and the King of the South? That's 1996 through 2001, through 9/11, there's no significant change on that message. You come to 2014, this is 18 years later. Is there any significant change? No. We do begin to understand in 2014 the understanding of Ezra, of fractals. We discussed that last week. Ezra 7:9. But now, once we get into this dispensation, we're looking forward to this waymark, commonly known as Raphia. So the subject of the king of the north and the king of the south becomes much more immediately relevant. So for about 18 years, there's been no significant further development on the message of Daniel 11:40 Part B, all the way till 2016, 20 years after the Time of the End magazine is published, saying that Part B was fulfilled, history, done. 2016, what do we begin to understand? (2016) says, we're not finished with Daniel 11 Part B. In fact, the king of the north and the king of the south are going to fight again. They're going to fight two battles, Raphia and Panium. So we understand that in 2016. Another study begins to be developed in 2016, Acts 27, leading by the end of that year to a study on Pyrrhus and World War II. So now we have Pyrrhus and World War II being added to that model. And what do they give us? They tell us there are not two battles, there's four battles. 2016 is a battle. 2018 is a battle. They give us the two fronts of this war. Now this is a war not just fought in the east. It's not something that's just visible between Russia and the United States, but it becomes an internal civil war in the west. With that, we begin to understand that all of this is an information war. Stone Age, stone weapons. Information Age, information weapons, which starts to give us an understanding of conspiracy theories, of the rise of the World Wide Web from 1989, of these platforms. So we're fighting with information weapons on both fronts of this two-front war. We then understand the concept of the deadly wound and the death. (1989) is the deadly wound. Leads to the death in 1991. 2021, Panium, the deadly wound. Leads to the death at the Sunday Law. Now for the first time we have an understanding of Daniel 11, 40 part B that takes us all the way to Daniel 11:41. So before, what we had was Daniel 11:40 part B, empty unexplained space, verse 41. With World War II, we were able to see Daniel 11:40 part B to here, then still empty space 41. When we understood the deadly wound and the death, we finally saw the full extent of verse 40 that would take us all the way to verse 41, all the way to the Sunday law waymark. No empty, unexplained space. Then came World War I. Now it's going to explain to us other elements that had not been understood. Particularly this Gulf War. Desert Storm. Afghanistan. Iraq. So we start to be more introduced to the significance of these spheres of influence, because this is an information war. But it's also fought out with proxies. Now we begin to understand better Libya, Yemen, Venezuela, Ukraine, and other Syria, other significant spheres of influence. So why do we have 20 years of Time of the End magazine from 1996 to 2016, where all we're seeing is essentially the same thing? Daniel 11:40 part B, fulfilled in 1989, no extra information. And then in just about 3 years, end of 16, end of 17, end of 18, end of 19, it grows to where it encompasses all the history from 1989 through all of those proxy wars, through 2014, all the way up to the Sunday law. So you have something that looks incredibly simple. 40 part B, fulfilled in 1989. And then God has to expand on that, unpackage that. And in that process, we start to see that our initial understanding was too simple. It left too many gaps. And then as God opens that up, it becomes so much more detailed, so much more precise. We have nothing to fear for the future, except as we shall forget the way the Lord has led us and His teaching in our past history. Our understanding in 1996 was not our understanding in 2016, was not our understanding in 2018, was not our understanding in September of 2019, is not our understanding in 2020. It has continued to grow and develop. But there was a reason that it particularly needed to swell in this dispensation. And why is that? Because this waymark is characterized by a battle between the king of the north and the king of the south. This is the history of the beginning of those battles. In fact, 3 of those 4 battles. So once we enter into this dispensation, we need to understand this, if you follow me, Boston waymark. We need to understand October 22. we need to understand the test. So the increase of knowledge, the formalization of that increase of knowledge is going to direct us to understand our test. So it's going to shine light on this waymark. In that process, whenever you shine a torchlight and you shine it at an object, it also disperses and shines some smaller, thinner light beyond. Do we understand the Battle of Panium? No. Do we need to? Yes. Will we? Yes. Because we're here. So we have more to learn. The danger is that unless we can look back and see how God has led us, we start to see advances in knowledge as either threatening the previous knowledge that we had, or as discrediting it, as if there were mistakes in the past that we need to be ashamed of, that we need to repent of. Either it damages our faith in God's leading of the movement, or we start becoming defensive of our old positions and unwilling, inflexible to advance. And there is nothing more dangerous than not being willing to learn. If we can understand how God has led us in understanding Daniel 11 verse 40, how do you think He's going to open up Daniel 11:41? If this is verse 40, what are your expectations of verse 41? We should expect the same thing. If we forget how God led us in understanding verse 40, the danger is that when we see Him open up 41, it will shake our faith. So I want to briefly address not just verse 41, but 2014, because what is 2014 for a priest? This is the Sunday law waymark. We might need to erase this in a moment, but a photo will be taken. So 1989, there's an increase of knowledge. And what does that increase of knowledge say about the Sunday law? It says, the Sunday law is coming. The Sunday law is approaching. Does it give much more information than that? If we understand the reform lines, the message is the Sunday law is in your lifetime. It's now directly in front of us. A waymark in our current dispensation. We are in the final generation. So the difficulty is seeing that you are on this line, but you're also on another line. There's two different lines that we're currently walking across. One is the priests, and what is the other? I might erase this for space. Remember this dispensation, when much of that light opened. So, what two reform lines are we on? Particularly thinking about Sunday law waymark. The reform line of the priests, where 2014 becomes the Sunday law. And what did we say happened at the Sunday law from last week? At the Sunday law, the United States speaks as a dragon. So in 2014, you expect to see a speaking of the United States as a dragon. But we're on another reform line. The reform line of the 144,000. Five key waymarks: ploughing, early rain, latter rain, harvest. And where are we? I want us to become comfortable that we are in the dispensation on the 144,000 heading towards the Sunday law, the same way we were in the dispensation of 2014 to 2019 heading towards Raphia. So what do you expect to happen with the subject of the Sunday law? Just as verse 40 just grew like popcorn when it pops. It went from so big to just an explosion of information. So when we're approaching the Sunday law, what should we expect? We should expect to come back here, 1996, and what are we going to see about our understanding of 1996? It's too simple. It gives us that kernel that's going to grow into an oak. It gives us that point, Sunday law, in this generation, present truth, reform lines. But it doesn't give us that explosion of information that we should expect. We should expect it, if this is 2014, we don't have much of an understanding about Raphia Panium. We have virtually none. 15 we don't. 16 we start to. It's the increase of knowledge. At the increase of knowledge, you would expect to see that message grow, swell, develop. And the danger is that in looking back, we lose faith in God's leading, because we could argue, why didn't He tell us that from back then? Maybe this movement has taught error in the past, the same way it taught that 40 Part B was fulfilled in 1989. We need to come out of that mindset and see how God has led in our past history, which explains how He's leading in our present history. So 1996, that kernel of truth, Sunday law in our lifetime, just before us. We begin to understand the Sunday law, a little earlier, because it did become part of the test of the early reign of the priests. The increase of knowledge of the early reign of the priests was the 2520 that developed into time. And 2012, what is said? 2014 is the Sunday law. Were they wrong? Spot quiz. Were they half right and half wrong? No. 2014 was the Sunday law waymark. It's that dangerous half right, half wrong thinking that makes us look back at 2012 and expect to see error. It was not error. It was perfect for the dispensation that it was in. What had to happen was a new dispensation come upon us, and with that new dispensation, if we go back to the idea of a classroom of grades, we just needed the next grade. And with the next grade came an understanding of fractals. 2014, an understanding of Ezra and the three groups we discussed last week: priests, Levites, Nethinims. Once we had that light, we understood 2014 was a Sunday law, not for the 144,000. Therefore, it's not Daniel 11:41, but a Sunday law for the first group called. So we started to have in 2012 a greater understanding of the Sunday law, just because we needed to understand time setting. And that would be further explained once we understood fractals. But what that Sunday law actually looks like had not materially changed. So 2014, we start to understand fractals. So I want us to understand 2014 in two different ways, if we can try and conceptualize both ways. When it comes to the reform line of the priests, this is the Sunday law. There is no other. It's just simply for that group of people the Sunday law waymark. But when we start to construct our lines with the fractals, we start to see another view of what God is trying to teach us. And when we see it that way, 2014 is a Sunday law for the priests. 2019, Sunday law for the Levites. 2021, Sunday law for the Nethinims. Daniel 11:41, Sunday law for the 144,000. And we see that evidenced when we go to the end of ancient Israel. What are the Gospels designed to teach us? Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, into Acts. What are they designed to teach us? They're designed to teach us all of the history that must happen, the steps that must occur before 34 AD, before the gospel goes to the Gentiles. Gospels are designed to show us the history prior to the gospel going to the world, the history prior to the Sunday law. So what these lines are teaching us, what much of our message is teaching us, is of the history leading up to the Sunday law. Remember where we were before. This is 2001. Sorry, this is for our past dispensation as priests. 2014, 16, 18, 19. The focus of that increase of knowledge was to prepare us for this event. Raphia, in that history. So much of what we're understanding is designed to prepare us for the Sunday law, not the history after the Sunday law, not the history after Panium. That wasn't the focus, but on the dispensation that we were currently in, the test that we were approaching. So we should expect in this history, in this dispensation, to have an explosion of information about the Sunday law, both in the timing of the Sunday law and in the characteristics of the Sunday law, what it looks like. And that all began at the increase of knowledge. From 1996 to 2019, 23 years, has there been any material change in our understanding of what the Sunday law looked like? No. Now what do we understand? King of the North, King of the South, leading us to the subject of church and state, church over state, state over church, dispensationalism, Eden to Eden, equality. So we understand here equality. We understand here an increase of knowledge on reform lines, which explains to us 1850 plus 1888 equal the Sunday law. Now we start to see that this waymark has as much to do with slavery as it has to do with the Sabbath Sunday question. So our understanding of this waymark begins to change. And what do people start doing? What they start saying is, you're fighting against the Time of the End magazine. This advancement in understanding is a direct attack on the knowledge we had 23 years ago. Why are they saying that on this subject, on the Sunday law subject? They never said that when it came to the subject of the King of the North and the King of the South. People can be very logical when they see knowledge increase on subjects that don't directly challenge their set way of thinking. Once that methodology, once God's leading, advancing, begins to challenge their deep-held fundamental beliefs, then it starts to become a fight. Now people start to see the advancement of knowledge as either two things. Either a rejection of prior knowledge, that this movement, that people in this movement are attacking the foundations of this movement's beliefs. So it's either an attack on foundations, or it is seen as evidence that God was never leading us to begin with. Because if He was leading us to begin with, then for 23 years we wouldn't have a wrong understanding of the Sunday law. I want to suggest both thoughts are a serious, life-threatening danger where we forget how God leads His people. In His past history, in the latter reign of the priests, when it came to the subject of verse 40, now it starts to challenge us And now we start to question God's opening up of verse 41. All that God is doing now is leading the same way He always has. So 2019, we begin to understand equality. Coming back to 2014, we need to see it in two ways. It is first, cutting out all other noise, the singular Sunday law for the priests. Put that thought to one side. It's not a contradiction, both are correct. 2014 is a small step towards Daniel 11:41. Step, step, step. United States speaks as a dragon. If we can visualize our fractals in this way, you have the 144,000. Ploughing, early rain, latter rain, harvest. Middle waymark, verse 41, Sunday law. Swelling to the loud cry. The Revelation 18, come out of Babylon, my people. Close of probation, end of intercession, beginning of the time of trouble, death decree. Time given for the second advent, the literal second advent of Christ. If you can picture that reform line of the 144,000, what is a fractal? However you conceptualize fractals, I want to suggest in this way that a fractal is and this is not an exact, it's a rough parable. A fractal is a shadow. So does a shadow have all the form and substance of the whole? No, it doesn't have all of the substance, it's a shadow of it. Which is why when we come to Panium, is there a literal present second advent? No. Stepping back, is there a death? Are we in a death decree right now? No. Are we in the time of trouble? Yes. Can you feel it? Yes. Does it hurt? Yes. Are we experiencing a death decree? No. You have the outline, the structure, but a shadow of the experience. So when you come to 2014, it is not Daniel 11:41. The same way the death decree of the 144,000 is not a death decree now. It becomes a shadow of it. If you can understand that type of parable. So 2014 for the priests, that is a rock solid, standalone reform line, 2014 being the Sunday law. If we step out and see the 144,000 and the overall picture that God is trying to show us, is He's showing us the steps that lead to verse 41. 2014 becomes a key step in that process. 2019 becomes another one. 2021 becomes another. This is the process of events that lead us to Daniel 11:41. So you're not going to find all of the characteristics of the Sunday law, verse 41, in 2014. I'm convinced that when we fully understand the Sunday law, when we're living through it, we will look back with greater clarity than we have now and see that step-by-step progression in the United States. The United States is not going to speak like a dragon in a vacuum. These things take a progressive succession of events, just the same as you would not be able to come to 34 AD and understand the stoning of Stephen without understanding John the Baptist, the ministry of Christ, the crucifixion, the work of the disciples and the early church. If you have no visibility of them, the stoning of Stephen means essentially nothing. We have to see the sequence of events that led to the stoning of Stephen, that demonstrated, explained what was then happening, the final rejection of the Jewish nation. If you don't know John, if you don't know Christ, if you don't understand the cross and the resurrection, the veil being torn in the temple, the rejection of the Jewish nation of that message, the work of the disciples at Pentecost, if you don't understand all of those things, the stoning of Stephen becomes meaningless in a vacuum. If Adventists reach the Sunday law waymark, it will become meaningless unless they see the steps that have taken us to the Sunday law. Internally, in this movement, and externally in the United States. So these lines and histories are designed to show us the sequence of events. 2014, depending on your view, is either the Sunday law for the priests, or it is the first of 4 events leading us to the 4th, the Sunday law. This does not do away with what we have taught in the past. It doesn't call it error. It doesn't diminish its significance. We just look back and see that kernel has grown into an oak. And it has quite some growing to do yet. This is essentially this waymark, 2016. How much did we understand about raffia in its details in 2016? Information war, two-front war, peace treaty, World War I. We understood very little. Do we understand the Sunday law just because we understand the message of equality? No, that's another trap. People think that we've arrived, we have the message, we don't need to keep watching, keep studying. We have so much we are still to learn about that waymark. It's only begun to grow. It is not yet formalized. We have not yet reached 2018 Exeter. So coming back to 2014, we read last week from the Great Controversy, beginning in page 440.2, Great Controversy 440.2, and I'll just remind us of the steps that we took. What nation of the New World was in 1798 rising into power? So Ellen White is saying all of this in the context of Revelation and the coming up of the lamb-like beast. So she quotes extensively from that portion of Revelation. The lamb-like beast spoke as a dragon. The lamb-like horns and dragon voice of the symbol point to a striking contradiction between the professions and the practice of the nation thus represented. So you have lamb-like horns, dragon voice, and we went through that. What are the horns? The horns are what the United States professes. What is the dragon voice? The voice is what it practices. So you have the profession and the practice, and the profession and the practice are in a striking contradiction. They contradict each other. The practice contradicts the profession. And that is what that picture is trying to teach us. A dragon voice is a contradiction to the lamb-like appearance of the two horns. She goes on to talk about the founders of the United States, how they wisely tried to separate the church and the state, how they sought to guard the employment of secular power on the part of the church. And a reminder, go back to the earlier presentations that talk about the Apis bull, that talk about the 7 mountains theology to understand where the United States is now when it comes to that sentence. But the inconsistency of such action is no greater than is represented in the symbol. It is the beast with lamb-like horns that speaks as a dragon. So when it speaks as a dragon here, it still has its horns. That's what we tried to go through last week and explain. Our understanding of those horns being broken, it's like an early understanding of the atom. It's sufficient for its dispensation because it helped us to see that the United States was not going to act after its profession, not when it comes to Protestantism, not when it comes to republicanism. So to help us see that, we're given the imagery of the horns breaking. We've advanced in our knowledge. Now we see that dictatorship, that war, that civil war in our own time does not look like the Hollywood World War II, Alexander the Great type of imagery in modern day. Now we see that the attacks on the Constitution are much more subtle. So the profession doesn't end. The United States continues to make this profession well after Daniel verse 11:41. The horns don't break because the United States never stops professing. We talk about this entity as being the false prophet. What's the problem with the false prophet? Do they ever profess, raise their hand and say, I am the false prophet? No. What are they professing? They're professing to be the true. So just the imagery of a false prophet should make us more comfortable with the idea that the United States never, whatever it practices, never stops professing to be true. Otherwise, it has no power of deception. If those lamb-like horns are broken when it speaks as a dragon or before it speaks as a dragon, where is the deceptive power? Where is the deception? There is none, because it's visible. It's only in those lamb-like horns that give it its power of deception. And then the key point we also took from these verses. The speaking of the nation is the action of which branches of government? The legislative and the judicial. How many branches of US government are there? 3. You have legislative, judicial, executive. Ellen White intentionally cuts out the executive and names the speaking as coming through the legislative and the judicial. So when we had an earlier understanding of the Sunday law, it's predicted in 2012. It's rejected by almost everyone who has now left this movement in 2020. It's rejected back then. In 2012, we go through 2014, and it is gradually accepted as the Sunday law waymark, as fractals are understood. It couldn't be ignored. But people are still debating, still arguing about what the Sunday law itself was in 2014. And why are they arguing? Why are they fighting? Because they're looking at 2014 and saying what? Obama didn't do anything. What did Obama do in 2014? The problem is, many of the people saying this, how do they feel about Obama? is not very popular. So they have extra reason to look to Obama as being the one, that evil Clinton associating globalist that's going to bring in the New World Order, unite world governments, take everyone's guns away, and institute a Sunday law. So they have an extra reason to look to the executive branch. But the quotes themselves tell you which branches of government to look for. The fact there was an Obama presidency in 2014 does not mean that a Sunday law could not take place, because it doesn't come through the executive. So I've had a couple of questions about what happened in 2014. For many people, this might be some revision, but as I've had questions, and I'd just like to do a little bit of a revision about what actually happened in 2014. Not in the executive branch, because Obama, I think we're all comfortable if we can say it overly simplistic. Remember, our message is always simple till it grows. Obama is a good guy. So we can't look to the executive. It's not Obamacare. We're going to look into the judicial and the executive.